Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, What You Need to Know Before You Start Your Zero Trust Program. This webinar is brought to you by Express Computer, powered by IBM. I'm Sudipta Dev, Senior Associate Editor with Express Computer. We all know that Zero Trust is seeing increased adoption globally when it comes to cybersecurity. Studies indicate that more than 78% of organizations surveyed worldwide are looking at adopting the zero trust approach. Zero trust aims to wrap security around every user, every device, every connection, every time, and hence it takes time to build and is continuously adaptive. There are several important aspects to be understood before starting the zero trust journey. And helping us to understand the same are our speakers for the day. Shiv Swarupa NS, Consulting and Delivery Lead, Security Services, IBM India Private Limited, and Tushar Haralkar, Security Software Technical Sales Leader, IBM Technology Sales, India, South Asia. Shiva leads the consulting and delivery responsibility for security services at IBM. He brings about 28 years of experience in the industry and has extensive experience of working with customers across the globe in the cyber domain. While Tushar has over 19 years of experience across business consulting, project delivery, and pre-sales, all in the cybersecurity domain. So before I hand over to them, I'll go over the webinar information. This is an audio and video webinar being broadcasted live and will be available as on demand. We will have polls in between the webinar. I request you all to participate in the same. We will have a round of Q&A at the end of the webinar. However, you can send in your questions anytime during the webinar using the Q&A text box. If you face any technical issues, please try to refresh your browser or else reach out to our team using the same questions text box. If any of your questions are unanswered, we will connect with you over email to answer the same. There is a survey form. This will appear in your browser once the webinar ends. We sincerely appreciate your feedback. We are going to do this webinar in the form of an engaging business meeting role play. So hope you enjoy our fresh approach to deliver the content. Let me quickly introduce the characters in this role play. Kapil, the CIO of a fictitious organization that has no resemblance to any actual entity. Tushar, the IBM Security Software Trusted Solution Advisor, and Shiva, an IBM Security Services Trusted Advisor. Kapil has approached Tushar and Shiva for some help. Let us pick up from there. Without taking more of your time, I invite Kapil to take the session forward.
Thank you, Sudipta. Tushar, Shiva, gentlemen, I have a lot going on, in my organization, and I need some help, for which I have, requested you to join this discussion. Like with most other enterprises today, for my organization, I see more and more workloads are actually more going on cloud. At the same time, more of our customers are engaging with us, digitally using digital transactions. And we need to be able to provide them not just a smooth, but also a very secure online experience. At the same time, the regulatory requirements, the number is going up and they're becoming more stringent. Also, Tushar and Shiva, today, more contractors, suppliers, partners, and even our employees, more of them are working remotely, like would be the case, I think, in many organizations today. So suddenly this means, we are dealing with exponentially more number of endpoints. We have to support them as IT. And we also, end up having reduced visibility to these endpoints because they're spread across. It's all becoming very complex and interconnected. Devices, users, data are all interlinked like never before. And this really increases the risks and the chances of, being breached. My question to you is, with all the chaos, all the changes that are happening, how do I minimize the impact of a breach? Tushar?
Hey, thanks, Kapil. Thanks for sharing those challenges. And we do see similar challenges across other BFSI industries as well. Let me, share my screen and walk you through, how do we really address this challenge? Okay, just give me a moment. So, Kapil, as you rightly mentioned, uh, the challenges that you spoke about, when we talk to other customers with similar industries, uh, this is where exactly they highlight the challenges that um, while they want to grow the business on the digital channels, the biggest challenge is how do they balance the user experience and security, because there are so many different type of users to manage, like employees, contractors, partners, as you said, um, coming from anywhere, any device, right? And you did also speak about your workloads moving to cloud. So in terms of your applications, your data, your infrastructure, now the data is not residing within the perimeter. It is gone beyond that, right? It is lying across hybrid cloud. So how do we address this complexity, and how do we build the trust across the channels is where we see organizations turning towards zero trust. Now, as we all know, zero trust is not a product, it's a security strategy based on certain principles, right? And the three core principles are never trust, always verify, enable least privilege, and assume that the breach has happened. So these are the three core principles basis on which the overall security strategy for zero trust is designed. Now, we help our clients adapt a perimeter-less world because, especially after pandemic, the data has been lying across everywhere, right? Users are accessing data from anywhere, any place, any device. Now, if you look at the perimeter, the traditional perimeter model that we had, for example, if I was within IBM Office, accessing my applications or data, sitting inside the IBM Office, sitting inside the corporate firewall, obviously there will be an implicit trust through which I can basically go and do my job. But now things are basically changing. So what zero trust will imply is even if I am within the IBM Office, there will be no implicit trust. Okay, it will basically always check that even if I am having my correct username password, or even if I'm coming from a registered device, it will also check the location from where I'm coming. It may also check the way I'm interacting with the application, right? There are various contexts that it will check, and then allow me access to the applications and data. So what we are seeing is a paradigm shift in terms of identity becoming the new perimeter now. Now, the obvious question is, while every OEM today is talking about zero trust, what is the framework that we should follow, right? That's where IBM helps you to identify a framework and then approach the zero trust security strategy. So my colleague Shiva is going to talk about the how part of it in terms of how do you really approach it in detail. But this is just to give a quick view of the analysts like Forrester. They have laid down this framework of zero trust. There is Gartner, and then of course we have NIST framework, right, to which we have to comply in terms of the overall strategy. So the basic idea of zero trust is to make sure that the right user has the right access to the right data under the right condition. That's the whole premise on which the zero trust is designed. Now, what we are saying here is, while there are many challenges that you spoke about, I would like to prioritize that into different categories, right? So what we do is we have a business first approach to the overall zero trust strategy, which will be aligned to your business priorities, right? So let's look at what are those, right? So now, if you look at remote workforce, now this is one of the use case which we see a lot today because of the pandemic, where most of us are working from home or anywhere for that matter, right? So the obvious question is, how do I secure my remote workers? That's the first one. The second is insider threats, right? Now, as part of one of the surveys, 60% of the cyber attacks are as part of insider threats. Now, one of the aspects that you also brought is the lack of visibility. How do I gain visibility, inside the organization is where, insider threats comes into play, right? That's the second one. And the third is, you did speak about, a lot of digital transactions happening online. So you're concerned about how do I manage that user experience and security, but at the same time, privacy plays a very important role, right? So you are concerned from an organization perspective, how do I maintain the privacy of my consumer data? At the same time, the end consumer is also concerned about how my personal data is going to be taken care of, right? And last but not the least, I think one of the challenges that you did mention about is your workloads are moving to the cloud, right? And that's where the hybrid cloud use case comes in, where your workloads are across hybrid cloud, but how you can have control over security, right? How you can manage the security in a very much centralized way. So these are the four core business priorities or use cases that we see, from a zero trust perspective. And of course, there is a fifth one also, which we all know of, which is the ransomware attack, which is increasing day by day. Now that is going to be the fifth one. But primarily, these are the four use cases that we see today when I talk to most of our, most of the organizations in the BFSI industry. So let me take a pause here, Kapil, and see if you have any questions.
No, I don't actually, and these are things that are actually keeping me awake at night, whether it's remote workforce, threat from, people inside, they might, do something by mistake, inadvertently, and of course, consumer privacy. And like I said, we are moving more and more workloads to cloud. So these are things that are keeping me awake at night, Tushar. But I really want to know, how can zero trust really help here? That's, I think, the $1,000,000 question.
Sure. So let me deep dive into each of this by giving one sort of a case study in terms of how we are doing for other customers, right? Now, if you take an example of remote workforce, how do I secure my remote workforce? So if you see, typically, this is how, as an organization, your remote workers would be coming in, and your existing, some of your workers would be actually within your premise, who would come through your corporate network and try to access your applications and data, which is spread across on-premise and cloud, right? Now, the biggest challenge that we see here is, how do I trust the remote worker? Because your internal network is getting exposed to that remote worker. So you need to basically have certain controls, which will just not rely on maybe just looking at username, password, or maybe just an OTP, because we all know both can be compromised. Username, password can be compromised due to a phishing attack, and OTP can also be compromised, maybe if there is an SMS listener on my mobile. So we all know that can be compromised. So the idea is, how do you look at an adaptive access kind of an approach, where you not only look at username, password, or something you have like an OTP, but you also look at the location from where I'm coming, the biometrics, and also maybe look at the way I am typing my password or the way I'm interacting with your application, right? And not just rely on one or two factor, or maybe not just rely on just the VPN, because the VPN, we are looking at organizations where they are saying, despite having a VPN, there are compromises happening because the passwords are getting compromised. So that's where the adaptive access plays a very important role. And this is one of the controls as an outcome that we have seen delivered to manage the secure remote workforce. And having said that, the other aspect is the remote workers can come from any device, right? Which could be in the unmanaged device also. So how do you really manage those kind of devices where you do not have any control? So it is important to also have visibility across those devices. And I think as an outcome of this challenge, we look at how do we bring in the identity and the device assurance, because identity is playing a very important role in this, because if your identity itself is compromised, eventually your data also gets compromised. So how we can increase that assurance part over and above what controls you may have. So if you see, the ones which are in gray are some of the controls that you can have on the endpoint. And also you can basically have some internal controls to manage your data for securing your remote workflows. The second is the how do you reduce the risk of insider threat? In this, typically, if you see, there are your business users, which are your employees, your business partners, and then you have your privileged users who are accessing your critical assets. Now, how do you have visibility to any anomaly that is happening, right? Because these are all your trusted users, right? So being trusted, most of the times they will have implicit access. So how do you basically detect that anomaly, that if, let's say, a privileged user is accessing a data during this time of the day, he's trying to exfiltrate some amount of data, which could potentially be not his normal behavior. So how do you really detect those kind of anomalies and address the insider threats, right? So that is something we also look at, having visibility into the insider threats, right? So that is one aspect of it. And second is, how do you proactively stop the potential threats? Like, for example, there could be a threat there could be an attack which has happened in your peer organization, right? How you can proactively look in your organization and check, am I prone to those threat or not? And then proactively maybe stop that threat from happening, right? So that is also something as an outcome you can look at addressing the risk of insider threat. And third aspect is, how do we preserve the customer privacy? Now, in this, we are looking at the data. We are looking at the customer data, which is accessed by your internal users, which is accessed by your customer exposed applications, and also your internal applications, right? So how do you protect that data? Because if there is a breach, if there is a data breach that has happened, you need to make sure that the data is still safe. And one of the ways is you can always make sure that the data at rest and the data in motion is encrypted. So if the data at rest is encrypted, even if the data is stolen, as long as your private key is with you, the data is of no use to the hacker, right? So you need to look at certain controls. One, from ensuring how the data at rest is secure, and the other is, how do you maintain the privacy of the data? One, from an organization perspective, making sure that all the customer data that you're storing is encrypted. The second is giving that convenience to the customer to decide what data they can share with you, right? In terms of their PII data. So giving them a consent that, I want to share this data, and giving them the visibility why you want to capture that data, in form of the consent management, so on and so forth. So I think those are the aspects that becomes very important, because we all know that there is a huge fine associated, like 15 crores for non-compliance of personal data, right? So those are the things that we look at, ensuring the customer privacy. And last but not the least, the hybrid cloud, right? How do you protect the hybrid cloud? Now, today, we see more than 90% of the organizations are looking to be hybrid cloud, right? Which means that data is spread across multiple clouds. Now, how do we have a centralized abstraction layer which will enforce my security policies across my hybrid cloud, right? It should be same across my hybrid cloud. So how do I really achieve that, right? That is one of the challenge when we move to cloud. How do I have control over security when I move to hybrid cloud? How do I ensure my identity, my data, my applications, how do I control that in a centralized way? Because now everything is scattered across different locations. So that is where we see an approach through which you can basically protect your hybrid cloud. So with that, I will just take a pause here. And Kapil, I hope that addresses your...
Yes, Tushar. I mean, I really love those 4 slides. They very crisply, but yet very meticulously explain, what and how Zero Trust can help. But, a little off the track, one question that I have, Tushar, I think I am first heard about Zero Trust about a decade or so ago, I think, when I was starting my career, about 10, 12 years ago. And, what I'm seeing today, everyone is talking about Zero Trust. Why are we looking at it suddenly as if it was a magic wand? What is driving that that perception, and how how accurate is it? in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely, Kapil. I think zero trust is not new to everyone. It's been introduced a decade ago. But why the zero trust adoption is gaining momentum now is simply because why organizations are really adopting a zero trust strategy now, right? Is one of the reasons is we see the cyber attacks, the cyber threats increasing day by day, and these are some of the numbers that you can see. There is an increase in the as we go online, right? As we purchase online, as we go more and more online, there is a it's an exponential increase in terms of the frauds that are happening, right, in India. And then the other aspect is to identify a breach. It actually takes close to an year, average time to identify and contain a breach in India. And these are the numbers that we have got from the Ponemon cost of data breach study, right? And then the other challenges that we also see is from a privacy perspective. If you are non-compliant, then there is a huge fine associated with, which is close to 15 crores, right? And a personal data protection bill is something which will be on the similar lines of GDPR, which is going to be launched soon. So these are a few of the things to give you a bit of a context. And then, of course, we as Indian consumers, the biggest concern is, we become victim of the scams of, a link which is sent to us. We click on that link and our username password is gone, right? And there are various frauds which are happening, especially as I mentioned, as we go more and more online. So the biggest issue that we are seeing today as part of being online is it's very difficult to determine who is on the other side of the keyboard, right? Because what we eventually gonna check is, my username password is correct, my device is registered, and maybe the location, right? If I'm coming from the right location. But what will be missing is maybe my device itself is compromised, right? Due to a malware attack, or maybe my username password was compromised due to a phishing attack, right? So those are the challenges that we see typically in a digital world. And then, of course, the new normal, right? And that adds to the new normal, where there is no perimeter now, right? As I mentioned in my earlier slide, there is no perimeter, right? The perimeter is diminishing, and identity is eventually becoming the new perimeter. We are no more coming only from corporate devices. There are multiple devices through which the employees, customers are coming, right? It could be their own device. And there are no more only few workers, few remote workers. Now everyone, most of us are working from anywhere. And data does not reside inside the network now, right? It's going hybrid. And then, as I mentioned, the most important aspect, we just cannot rely on authentication, which is the username, password, and OTP, right? Today also, if I do a banking transaction, what I'm doing is just putting my customer ID, password, and an OTP. That's it. But we all know those are getting compromised. So there has to be a mechanism where we are able to determine and build that assurance that, hey, this is Tushar, or this is a bot, or this is a fraudster. So what we are eventually saying is, we are moving from an era of trust but verify to never trust, always verify, right? That's where we are seeing a huge momentum of the adoption of zero trust because of all of these challenges that I spoke about. And I can give you one of the examples, right? While I was the recent example when I was actually parking my vehicle in IBM premise. Most of the times the guard will just check the sticker on my car. Yeah, oh, there is an IBM sticker, allow him. But there was one security guard who basically also mentioned that, hey, I want to see your ID card as well, which was good because there could be potentially a case where I'm no more part of the organization, but the sticker on the car is still there. So we cannot. So the point that I'm trying to make is, we are actually now moving from an era where we cannot rely on just one factor. You have to look at the whole context of the identity and then take a decision. And that's where we do see a huge adoption for zero trust now because of the new normal, Kapil.
Okay, I get it, Tushar. I think a lot of what you said made sense. I'm even willing to buy your logic of why zero trust and why now. But what I kind of need a little more help with is how do I get started with my zero trust journey? My program. Do I need to really overhaul? Does zero trust mean overhauling my existing security setup, starting afresh? Is there a particular state of security maturity that I need to be before I actually consider beginning implementing zero trust? So just what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that, Tushar?
Sure, Kapil. So now that we have covered the what part of it, what and why zero trust now, my colleague Shiva will basically walk you through, how do we really take care of, because that's the most important aspect of it. What is IBM's approach towards this zero trust strategy, right? So I will hand over to my colleague Shiva, who will walk you through the how part of it.
Yeah,
Hey,
thanks.
over to you, Shiva.
Yeah, thank you. So Kapil, before I really get into, how do we move forward from adoption point of view, see, I can't help adding to what Tushar already said to one of your questions, right? Which was a very relevant question. You had a question that zero trust has been there for ages, right? But what is so great about it now? And why is it that almost all the vendors are talking about zero trust? It is simply because of two things. One, Tushar very clearly mentioned that one of the philosophies of zero trust is assume breach. Assume breach in the sense that today everyone has reached a stage where we all realize, when I say we, vendors, service providers, customers, all of us realize that irrespective of what we do, there is always a potential for a hacker to break in, because technology is evolving very rapidly, right? And convenience is always a question. Process complexity continues to exist, so hackers always find a way to break in. So that is the assume breach philosophy. The second aspect is, let us say that you really do get breached. Now, the fundamental thought process of zero trust is to minimize the damage because there is a breach, and one of the biggest techniques that the hackers use to cause damage is lateral movement. So zero trust essentially helps you in minimizing that lateral movement by examining every transaction that happens. And every customer, knowing or unknowingly, would have implemented a lot of controls like identity management, like firewalls, like IDS and IPS, some rudimentary form of data classification, data security, and so on and so forth, without really giving a lot of thought to zero trust. Now, any customer who has implemented certain basic technologies essentially fall into maturity level 1 and 2 that you see on the slide, which is ad hoc and repeatable. Repeatable is where controls are in place, processes are in place to a large extent. But what would be missing in maturity state 1 and maturity state 2 is context. And context is what brings the aspect of zero trust into action, which is, do I identify the endpoint? Is that endpoint compliant to my policies? What is the risk that endpoint is bringing into my organization? Now, do I trust this identity? Is this a high risk user or a low risk user? Is this user trying to access an application, and is that application high risk or low risk, right? So these are some of the questions that the context will help you answer. Now, based on the outcome of that context analysis, you will then, or zero trust will then make a decision as to what kind of access should be given to that user, when he or she actually comes into the ecosystem. So the next three levels of the maturity model, which is 3, 4, and 5, are all based on how mature is your context and your ability to enforce that context to every authentication, authorization, and access decisions that you make. So maturity level 3 is one where you have some amount of context available. You are enforcing that. However, your backend, when I say backend, you might not have the relevant data classification in place. Data, let's say you would not label the data into different categories based on the criticality of the data to you. You also made a very valid point in the beginning where you said that more and more workloads are going into the cloud. Now, today you might not have a very well defined classification model for the workloads itself to say that these are my low risk workloads, these are my high risk workloads which run on some of my most critical applications. And access to that is extremely sensitive, and it is very, very tightly controlled, right? So maturity level 4 and 5 are the ones where you have a good classification of your identity, your workloads, your data, and then the context that you have is enabling you to make those access decisions wherein somebody accessing a specific high risk application from a coffee shop at midnight from a different country, is not allowed access. It's as simple as that. And the final maturity level is the one where you establish a closed loop policy for refining your context on a continuous basis, because the magic bullet in zero trust is not identity, is not DLP, right, is not firewall, is not anything else. It is nothing but the context. How well you can determine the context of a user coming in to access a particular set of data or application, and how well can you make a decision on the risk level of that access, based on where, when, what, right, some of these parameters, and then allow or deny access. So that is the whole essence of zero trust. And these are the different maturity models that exist when it comes to zero trust journey. Having said that, where to begin, right? So the next slide essentially speaks to some of the approaches that we have where we can help you in embarking on this journey. So that the first engagement that we can execute with you is what we call as the zero trust framing and discovery, which I will talk about it in detail in the next couple of slides. Zero Trust Acceleration is a service offering where customers are already on their way for Zero Trust implementation. This will essentially accelerate their journey by fine-tuning their strategy, by defining a very granular roadmap, by benchmarking where they are on the maturity curve, and so on and so forth. I will also speak to this in a little more detail in the subsequent slides. And finally, we have, IBM as a company brings together the set of services and technologies that can help our customers realize, the zero trust, whether it is from the solution perspective or from the services perspective. So I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, Shiva, indeed you have. So if I understand correctly, you're saying the zero trust framing and discovery is what I need to be looking at if I'm kind of starting my journey, or understanding where to start and how to start. So what kind of timelines are we talking about? Can you share more details about? I understand this looks like a workshop. So what are the timelines of this workshop, and what happens after the workshop? What are the key outcomes that we can expect from the workshop, Shiva?
Yeah. So moving to the next slide, you see the framing and discovery workshop doesn't demand a lot of time. We can execute it in about 3 to 4 hours of time frame. Now, what is it that we do in this workshop? See, as we all realize, and we discussed it as well, that most of our customers would already have implemented certain controls, which knowingly or unknowingly aligns with zero trust. They would also be executing some of their engagements or projects, which again aligns with zero trust. So this whole workshop is essentially aimed at consolidating all the initiatives that the customer is currently executing, is aimed at looking at some of the projects that are already operational, and then tie them all together to the zero trust umbrella to see where exactly they fare on the zero trust engagement, and help them in charting out a plan or a path forward in terms of how they can realize the zero trust journey, by identifying some of the gaps, and also by helping them identify some of the improvements that can be brought in to some of the initiatives that they are doing. So moving to the next slide, I think I'll try and make it a little more clearer. So this is how the construct looks like, where The participants includes, yourself, the Chief Information Security Officer, some of the senior security leaders from your team, and the senior, IT architects and enterprise leaders from the organization. So the workshop is effective when we have about 5 to 7 participants working with us. The workshop is executed remotely on a WebEx, and we use tools like Mural. And the agenda is what you see, but I will talk to you a little more detail in the next slide. What we do in this is, see, so this gives a very detailed breakdown of how we execute this and what we do. So the initial 20 minutes would be focused on understanding the different team members, their roles and responsibilities, and how they view zero trust, right? And what are they looking at zero trust to deliver for each of them. So in simple terms, I would say we understand the persona behind each of the roles that are existing. Then we will understand the security landscape that exists today. When I say security landscapes, it includes both the existing engagements that are in flight and the engagements that are already operational. We will then benchmark this, or let's say we do a comparative analysis with the zero trust POV and the framework that Tushar spoke about, to see where does it really overlay on the zero trust journey. And then we will look at how we can apply that framework to your enterprise, in terms of architecture and technical capabilities and all of that. Once we do that, then we will also jointly identify what are some of the risks and mitigations that we need to bring in to enable you to move forward on your path. And when we do so much of this, it would take about 2.5 to 3 years. We will have a good view of what is your risk profile, what are your key engagements, how all of them essentially overlay onto the zero trust framework. With all of that data in hand, we will work with your team to prioritize in terms of what should be taken up for implementation and how that will help you in reducing some of the risks that are already identified. And finally, we wrap up by identifying some of the key dependencies and the critical success factors for helping you embark on the zero trust journey. Any questions, or did I answer?
Yeah, Shiva. So I think to summarize what you're saying, essentially the workshop will help understand where I am, in my current state. What are some of the key risks that I want to prioritize? Not everything can be done immediately,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So you'll help me. We'll work together to prioritize which risks we want to go after first, and then work towards understanding my current landscape, and then work towards a roadmap of how do we tackle them. So in a way, you answered all the questions I had on this. My next question is, while this sounds great on paper, on a slide, I would be keen to know, Shiva, if you've done this, with somebody, and the kind of leverage or outcomes, that were delivered. Can you show something in action, possibly?
Yeah, so moving to the next slide, it essentially summarizes the outcomes and deliverables, that this will essentially bring to your organization as far as the workshop is concerned. Mm-hmm. The subsequent couple of slides that I have are essentially screenshots, because I am not allowed to share more data. Mm-hmm. So if you see here, the first engagement of the workshop is to, as I said, persona, right? We need to understand the persona behind each of the person that is there in the workshop. And this entire exercise is done on a mural board, and each of the participants can essentially share their requirements and the way they perceive zero trust. So the different colors on the screen indicate the different personas who are participating in the workshop, right? So why do you need zero trust essentially gives us a perspective of what the person or the stakeholder is looking at from a zero trust point of view. Similarly, what zero trust means to you is in terms of the outcomes that they think it will deliver. Like if you see here, someone has said application based VPN, someone has said that micro security isolation. That is where I was going when I said that you need to segment your workloads, classify your workloads, so that even if there is a breach, hackers cannot move freely between one category of workload to another category of workload, right? So these are some of the things that we will get out of the workshop. Moving to the next slide, which is a little more detailed. This gives you a good view of what are the long-term goals for each of the persona that he or she is looking at, and then what is it they think it will deliver for them. And the bottom two pictures or the segments relate to aligning some of the existing projects with zero trust. What current priorities that they have in flight, and then what are some of the challenges that they see. So these challenges essentially translate into risks when we come out with the framing workshop report, and identifying the key dependencies to resolve some of these challenges, and also to formulate some of the critical success factors to take the program forward. Okay. So, please note one thing, that all of this is extremely interactive. These are executed through design thinking workshops. We leverage the mural boards, and as I said, each color you see is a different persona interacting in the workshop, sharing their thought process and expectations and outcomes that they believe zero trust will deliver for the organization. So next slide. Again, this is done on purpose. You might not see everything very legibly, but this essentially gives a mapping of the current projects that are in flight from a zero trust point of view for this specific organization, and some of the projects that they have planned without really tying everything back to zero trust. So this workshop essentially helps you get everything under the zero trust umbrella, identify gaps, identify risks, dependencies, and critical success factors, and essentially gives you a path forward from a zero trust implementation point of view. So I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, Shiva, absolutely. This is I think a very helpful peek into how you actually did it with one of your customers, and that really helps me understand how once we decide to do it with us, how we'll actually plan this out. Now, I'm assuming, Shiva, this workshop is meant for people who have either not started their journey or in the very, very early stages of the journey. But what if, what if I tell you that I already have solutions, uh, where, uh, you know, where basically, we're on that journey. We might not be there yet, but we're on that journey already. How do I, what do you have for me if I have to increase the rate of my zero trust adoption? If I need to do it faster, or I'm getting stuck somewhere. I've already started the journey, but not really, been able to move forward in it. So you have something that that you can advise me, Shiva, on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next couple of slides are essentially focused on that. And the service that we bring to the table for accelerating your journey is what we call as zero trust acceleration services. And yeah, move to the next slide, Tushar. That's fine. Yeah, next one. Yeah, so what we essentially do here is that see, zero trust so far, just to quick summary, we have discussed about what it brings to the table. One is to help you defend an enterprise, to help minimize lateral movement if hackers are coming in. And then the fundamental philosophy is trust but verify. Now, having said all that, it also goes a long way in complying to a number of regulatory mandates as well. So one of the exercises that we do as far as zero trust acceleration services is to first evaluate your risk catalog. Also evaluate some of your threat assessment reports if it is already been done. We will also look at what are some of the regulatory mandates that you as an enterprise have to comply with. So all of this, I think the key thing here is your risk catalog and your regulatory mandates. those will essentially come in as an input into our overall zero trust governance model and our use case library. Now, the governance model and the use case library is built on a number of security best practices, frameworks, NIST model, Cloud Security Alliance. So all of that essentially act as inputs based on which we have come out with the governance model and the use case library. Then, we will evaluate or benchmark where you are, in terms of this best practices model, and then come out with a zero trust improvement roadmap, okay, which will help you align your zero trust journey both from a maturity point of view and also from a acceleration point of view. Okay, now you can also see on the right hand side that it is not really limited to IT or OT. We will extend it to all your environments. It could be cloud because you're migrating to cloud. If you have an OT environment, even the OT environment can be considered in scope, and DC is nothing but your traditional data center. So all of these environments are also taken into account. These are also assessed from a zero trust gaps and possible issues. And from a best practices point of view, we will benchmark against the use cases, and then we will come out with a comprehensive zero trust improvement roadmap, which can then be leveraged to move forward rapidly on your zero trust journey. So moving forward, the next slide gives a little more detail. We don't have to go into every bullet here, but this essentially gives you a view of how comprehensive the acceleration service that we bring to the table. And it essentially consists of 4 phases. Obviously one is the initiation phase, then there's the assessment phase, strategy phase where we actually do the gap analysis, and then the planning phase is one where, if you see, we will create a list of initiatives for each of your environment. It could be your IT, OT, it could be anything else. Then how create the project definition for you, help you create a prioritization matrix, and then help you in creating the roadmap to execute based on the prioritization that has been created. So this essentially is a summary of the acceleration services that we bring to the table for those customers who are a little ahead on their zero trust journey, but will need help to align it back to changing business demands and accelerate their journey to meet some of the growing. Today I think pace is a big issue, so that is where I think this makes a lot of difference to our customers.
Okay. No, Shiva, actually I'm glad I I could get both you and Tushar for a one-on-one, or rather a two-on-one, to help me understand how do I really initiate or kickstart my journey. Now I think I really want to leverage one or two of these things. First of all, do I need to pay something to avail the workshop?
Yeah, so I think the next slide gives you a view of that. So the framing workshop is a no-cost workshop. Okay, so that is something that we will do at no cost. As I said, it is a 3 to 4 hour workshop. We will share who all are needed to execute that workshop. We will execute that using WebEx and Mural. So it's fairly easy on you and your team, and it's also easy for us to execute as well. And these are some of the contact details that you can note to reach out to if you are interested in moving forward on the zero trust framing workshop, and we'll be more than happy to engage and move forward. At the same time, we will also conduct a poll now to check if any of our participants today in the webinar are interested in leveraging the no charge zero trust framing and discovery workshop. So while the poll is being conducted and close and while the poll closes, I would also like to take this opportunity to open up the webinar for any questions that any of our participants might have, and you can share your questions on the chat window.
Thank you so much, Shiva, Tushar and Kapil for this very engaging discussion. In a very innovative way, you have shared a wealth of information on zero trust strategy. I would actually like to read out the poll question once for our audience. The poll question is, would you like to enroll for zero trust framing and discovery workshop with IBM Security at no charge? There's just a single choice, yes and no. So please select one of those options and our experts would be very happy to connect with you. Okay. So I also now open the floor to questions. I request everyone to use the Q&A text box to send in their questions, and I will take them one by one till time permits. So I see that we already have quite a few questions here. And the first one is, how can you secure workloads / containers that get spanned dynamically? Mr. Satish Kulkarni is asking this question. So, Tushar or
Sorry, can you just repeat the question, please?
I'll repeat the question. How can you secure workloads or containers that get spammed dynamically? If it's not clear, I'll move to the next question.
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Shiva, go ahead.
Yeah, so see, as far as workloads are concerned, right now with the cloud, it's a new way of working. Now, to secure the workloads, whether it is a VM or a container or whatever else it is, the focus essentially shifts to what we call as the master template for spawning any of these workloads. And see, the traditional way of executing security is to put in a workload and then scan it for vulnerabilities and remediate and then fix, So that essentially has not given a lot of great results. So in the new way of working, the shift left philosophy works here as well, where the master templates is what you continuously build, you continuously scan, you continuously fix, and you leverage the immutable functionality of the cloud, where, let us say, if any of the workloads is identified to have a vulnerability, then you just shut down that workload and spawn a new workload based on the secure workload template that you have. So that is one part of the answer. The second part of the answer is, when we say security of a workload, it means two things. One is the basic configuration of the workload itself to ensure that it is secure. Second is which I was referring to as zoning. Now we will have to leverage the zero trust concept to also implement zoning, and zoning is based on the risk of the workload. We will segregate it into different zones, and then we will implement firewall-like capabilities for movement between different zones. Okay, so that is to prevent any unnecessary traffic from flowing across a secure workload zone and a non-secure workload zone. And again, you have a lot of other monitoring and other functionality that comes into picture. So in summary, these are some of the aspects that can be brought into picture to secure the workloads.
Thank you, Shiva, for explaining it so well. Now, the next question, Mr. Neil Nayak is asking. He wants to know that zero trust means from all 7 layers, we need to ensure control along with processes are in place. Is this a control-based approach instead of risk-based approach? Please clarify how risk-based approach with zero trust can be achieved.
Yeah, so this is a risk-based approach only. Now, as I was saying in the acceleration slide that I showed you, one of the first things that we do is to analyze your risk register, assuming that you have one. Now, whether it is an identity, whether it is a data element, whether it is a workload element, whether it is a network element, all of them is assessed and categorized based on risk. So if there is a PII data, if you are holding PII data, then that belongs to the highest risk category, and I have to do everything possible to ensure that it is protected, even if at an enterprise level there is a compromise. And that is exactly the philosophy that zero trust brings into picture, wherein the context that we were talking of, the access decisions are made based on the context. So if if somebody is making a request to access a high risk data element from an unknown country at a godforsaken time with a device that is not registered, that is not compliant to my enterprise policies, then with zero trust, I will never give that person access. I will drop that access request at the point of the request itself. So that is the risk-based philosophy that zero trust brings into picture. And to implement that zero trust philosophy, obviously you need to implement a lot of controls. And you would have already implemented a lot of controls by now. It is a matter of bringing all of them together under the zero trust umbrella and bringing in the concept of context, to the entire process of making decisions. So that is how I would look at zero trust.
Thank you, Shiva. So the next question, Mr. Rajan Dang, he wants to know how he can leverage zero trust policy engine for a scenario where role configuration on a platform is not very granular or configurable due to OEM constraint. Basically wants to know that how he can leverage zero trust where conventional methods do not suffice.
See, that is why we have a higher level of abstraction here. Okay, where at the access point itself, I'm sorry, I cannot give a very prescriptive answer to this question unless I know what is the limitation that we are talking of. But I understand that every enterprise has some magnitude of legacy platforms, legacy applications, and so forth. So in such a scenario, the limitation would continue to exist. There is no way we will do away with the limitation. But what we are doing here is minimizing the risk, wherein there will be another layer of abstraction on top of these workloads. Let's say it is a platform or an application, and we can only minimize the risk to a certain extent by evaluating, as Tushar was saying, right, based on the identity, based on the device, based on the location, and so on and so forth. And we will also have a fair view of what this workload, assuming that this is a workload that we are talking of, what this workload is made up of, right? In the sense that the criticality of this workload, how critical is this workload to the organization? The very fact that it is still legacy, it cannot be touched, means that it is a very critical workload. So that is the decision that I would go with. With that assumption, we will ensure that there is enough contextualization available in the policy engine to drop majority of the connections that we feel would be of risk if they access this legacy workload. That is all that can be done. Rest of the access control decisions will continue to be made by the legacy workload itself. I hope I have answered that question. If we have to, we can discuss this in detail as a follow-up to this webinar.
Thanks, Shiva. Mr. Fatnaik, he wants to know how effective is ZTNA for an enterprise in the SMB segment, and does it justify the cost of implementation?
You said ZTNA, right?
Yeah, zero trust network access.
Yeah. See, zero trust network access, in my opinion, is one of the most commonly implemented use case across the globe. Not just in India. Every customer that I have been talking to have embarked on this journey, whether they are doing zero trust across the board or not. So zero trust network access is in my opinion, the fundamental step that almost every enterprise is doing, irrespective of whether they're SMB or a large enterprise. It does provide its own benefits. It makes the end user life a little more easier, and it helps solve the remote access problem for almost every enterprise in a much more secure manner. So my answer is yes.
Thanks, Shiva. And we'll take one more question. How critical is a DLP and or EDR in zero trust architecture for an organization?
Yeah, so see, instead of saying critical, I would say they have become EDR at least is a necessity in today's world, because the rate at which attacks are happening, it is one of the fundamental controls that an enterprise has to have. That is an EDR. Now, DLP again, an effective DLP solution is dependent on how well we know the data that exists in the enterprise. I think the $1 million question today is do we know what data we have? Have we classified the data that we have, based on the risk that it entails to the enterprise? And if we have answers to those questions, DLP becomes that much more easier. But DLP again has become a kind of a needed control, because every enterprise today also has a DLP solution in some form or the other. It at least helps you in protecting data at rest on each of the endpoints, right? Irrespective of whether they have a data classification or not. It helps you in securing the data that exists on the endpoint. It also helps you in securing the data in transit. But in my opinion, if I have to tie it back to zero trust, I think the data security maturity in zero trust is still a long way off for customers across the globe, because that is where most of your privacy rules come into picture. We need to understand what we call as the data lineage. When I say data lineage, it is, when did this data come into my enterprise? How did I change this data through its life cycle? What applications touch that data? What user touched the data? I need to maintain that complete life cycle information for the data in the enterprise. And then an end user should be able to look at that and say that I do not want you to use my data, please forget my data. That is the ultimate goal of GDPR or data privacy laws. And that is what zero trust essentially entails as well. So DLP is one small step in the overall data privacy journey. And yes, DLP does play a role in helping you secure data at rest and data at motion. But for it to be more effective, I would say data classification is also a fundamental aspect.
Yeah, and just to add to it, I think very nicely explained by Shiva. Just to add to it, while we are looking at, what is critical, what is not critical, like, DLPs and other technologies, it's also important aspect to, integrate all of these tools together. They need to marry each other so that you have the complete visibility around it. Because what DLP will give you is a limited visibility, or probably what a monitoring of data could give you some limited visibility. So you need to integrate, you need to have the ability to integrate all of these investments that you would have done in the form of maybe of a DLP, or maybe in the form of a tool for monitoring your data. All of that has to integrate at one place so that you get the visibility of what is the risk with your data, and the data can be any kind of data. So integration aspect also plays a very important role.
Thank you, Shiva and Tushar, and the audience. We know that you have sent many questions, and those will be answered by the IBM team. We will touch base with you. And that's all the time we have for today. I thank again Shiva and Tushar for explaining the practical approach to Zero Trust program. To know more, you can get in touch with the IBM team. The contact details are on your screen. And thank you, audience, for your interest and time. Please do remember to fill in the survey form at the end of the webinar. It will appear in your browser. We look forward to welcoming you all in our next webinar soon. Have a great day ahead.